Elizabeth Becker, the film is based on her book. So, and actually, the film is partly almost based on your life, correct? Or,
I am the woman.
yes, she's the woman, the journalist in the film. We are grateful that she's here today with us. And also, our moderator today is Dorothy from the podcast Death in Cambodia. And without further ado, thank you. I will hand it off.
Saksabai Kunchavan. I was brought out here because this is my story, very much turned into a feature film by Rithy Panh. And I can barely see with that light, please. Could you turn it down? I can't see. Thank you. I made that trip with 2 other people, and then Rithy Panh turned it into a movie. And I'd like to first tell you who Rithy Panh is. I'm not sure everybody knows. As Cambodians, you should be extremely proud of him. He's a survivor himself. He was 13 years old in April 1975 when the Khmer Rouge won and took over. During those 4 years, he lost both of his parents and half of his siblings. Then, not clear from the movie, but the Vietnamese actually did come in and get rid of the Khmer Rouge regime. The only invasion they did after 1970, after the war, and it allowed Cambodians to leave if they wanted to. Rithy went to France, and he has said many times that film saved his sanity. This is the 8th film he's made about the Khmer Rouge period. It premiered in Cannes. I was privileged to be there and walk down the red carpet with him. He was introduced by the president of the Cannes Film Festival as the protege of Claude Lanzmann, who is a very famous French filmmaker who did the great 2-part series on the what we call the Holocaust, but is known as Shoah. So he is very well known in Europe, and I think getting to be better known here. We first met in 1994 when he made the first movie based on my book called Pol Pot. And that's a story within my book when the war was over about a Cambodian woman whose story I retrieved from the Tuol Sleng torture center. It so moved Rithy that he made a movie, and she has become his muse. So every single movie he's made, there's a photograph of Bopana in it. And in this movie, he created Bopana as the female journalist translator, which is not the case, but is very much part of the way he reimagined my story. So I'll take it from there.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You guys can hear me okay? I just want to reiterate, honestly, guys, having Elizabeth Becker here is just really such an honor to have her here, because this book, when the war was over, and I actually have a copy of it with me, as she'd mentioned, chapter 11 is really what this movie was based upon. But Elizabeth truly, I think, is quite honestly the queen of journalism on the Khmer Rouge. And she was one of, as you can see in the movie, one of the only people that actually got to interview Pol Pot during the war when he was alive at that time. So I think she's just got so much knowledge.
Yeah, what you've just seen, the first picture was the group. If you could go back to the first picture, please. Okay, that's me. I'm a little younger than the actress. I'm 31. The older man is another American journalist who's not in the movie. He's been replaced by that wonderful black photographer, Cecil Goyu, and which is part of Rithy's reimagining. And then the fellow in the black shirt is the intellectual, but he was British, not French. We're all turned into French, which is not when Americans make a film based on an original film from Japan or France, they turn them into Americans. And that's what Rithy did here.
As you know.
And then the next picture, That's my photograph of Pol Pot. And as you can see, he's much more handsome and charming and charismatic in person, and he was just as wild. So.
Yeah, so we appreciate you here, being here today, Elizabeth. The question that I want to ask, since we're on the photo of Pol Pot here and getting right into it, I think you are one of the handful of people that can actually talk about what it's truly like to be in front of a person like Pol Pot, somebody and a figure like him. I hate to use the word figure, but I mean, somebody like him with that sort of, in that time period. What can you say about that first time sitting in front of him? In the book, you mentioned that he was sat there like a king, and tell us a little bit about that experience.
Okay. Well, first of all, this is December 1975, before we knew what was really going on. And I will go on to how much, what Rithy showed you what was going on behind the scenes that we could not see. But all we had was the propaganda in front of us, the refugee reports, some of the intellectual reports, and seeing between the lines. So when we met Pol Pot, we did not know anywhere near the extent. We knew, I'm the one who had the nightmares. That's why the female character has the nightmares. I had lived there before. I had all the trepidations. The other two had not lived there. They had, the intellectual had never been to Cambodia, and the other journalist had visited it once. So I knew what was missing. I knew how horrible it was, but none of us knew the extent. So we walk in there, and first of all, I was surprised by the charm. He was very well groomed. He did not look like he'd spent a minute in the jungle. And he had us sit down. He did not rise for us. We sat down on one side, and he had 4 translators, including the people that you saw in the film. Yang Sari, his brother-in-law, the foreign minister, Tuan Prasit, who is the guide through it, and 2 others. So we had more interpreters than we had anybody else. And we had handed in our questions ahead of time as the reporters did in the movie, and he didn't answer them. He instead lectured us on the upcoming war between Vietnam and Cambodia. And in real life, that's what was bothering the intellectual. He and the other reporter, the older gentleman, they believed most of the propaganda. I was the one who didn't, and those are the arguments we had every night when we were locked into our guest room. The intellectual is upset because revolutionary communist Vietnam was fighting against revolutionary communist Cambodia, and they were supposed to be the vanguard of the new movement. And he had a strong conversation one evening with Yang Sari, and to him, that was what was most disturbing. When he saw Pol Pot, he told us he saw Pol Pot separately, which was in the film, and all they talked about was agricultural policy. But that night, as in the movie, gunmen broke in, and they first threatened me, then they threatened the other journalist, and then they went into the room and murdered Malcolm Caldwell, the intellectual.
You mentioned in the book that Malcolm Caldwell really, you think, really was the only one that was targeted out of the 3. You believe that's true, Elizabeth? That he was the one that was targeted out of the 3.
I was the first one the gunman saw, and he could have killed me right there. I did go into the bathtub, and that's what everybody remembers from the book, that I hid in the bathtub, which was not so peculiar because I had been a war correspondent, as I told you, for 2 years in Cambodia. And that's one of the things you learn, that the only natural fortress is a home is that porcelain tub. Mm-hmm. So I went in the tub. He could have run after me. He went upstairs, shot at the bottom of the door of Richard Dudman, the other reporter, and then walked into the room and killed Malcolm the way he is, as the intellectual is killed in the movie. That's totally true. And then they ran away and left us alone for hours until they told us that Malcolm was killed, and I did go out to the airport with the the other, Dudman and I did go out to the airport with the casket and go to Beijing and call Peking. Yeah.
Right. I think what's fascinating is, and a big question when I was reading your book in comparison to the movie, why would they want to target Cadwell when they knew that Cadwell actually was kind of pro-socialist and actually was kind of pro-communist, and he was invited as a quote-unquote friend of Pol Pot out of the 3 journalists that you guys saw in the movie. And so in my head, I'm like, why would you try to kill somebody who might actually report about a positive side of socialism? And so I found it very strange, and I wondered if you had any questions on why he would be the one targeted out of the 3.
I think Rithy got around that.
Okay.
But in real, Rithy got around that by showing the intellectual questioning Pol Pot.
Got it.
And
Okay.
I think that was brilliant, and
Sure.
I think he used, the dialogue is on the money. But in real life, I think the reason we were invited to Cambodia at that moment was that the Khmer Rouge knew they were going to be invaded by Vietnam, and they were terrified. So in the audience we had, all that Pol Pot did was lecture us on the upcoming war with Vietnam, and he said the Vietnamese would be aided by the army of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. No, you're all too young, but the Warsaw Pact were the European countries that were part of the larger Soviet Empire. When he first said Warsaw Pact, I asked for clarification because I thought that was crazy. But then the next thing he said was he expected NATO to come to his aid and fight against the Vietnamese in the Warsaw Pact. And he used all of these horrible words about the Vietnamese, as you know, Yun, that's all he called them was Yun, not Vietnamese. Just basic racism. And this was what was so confounding. The war ended in 75, and here we're at the end of 78, and it was upside down against the Vietnamese. So I think for those reasons, the message was United States, NATO, help us. And so who were the 2 messengers, the 2 reporters? I was Washington Post, and the other was a paper called the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So we could bring the message back, and the murder of Malcolm Caldwell would frighten anybody else from thinking they could come visit. So he was expendable, and he also made the trip very serious, because in those days, that was highly unusual. Unfortunately, nowadays, journalists have become targets, but then it was front page news everywhere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you guys can see, I mean, it's very fascinating to see the way that everything was set up, everything was staged, and everywhere that you guys were taken, you in the book you even mentioned that you recognize, some of the people who were shown as workers, but actually were just Khmer Rouge soldiers that were acting along. So it was as if you were coming to visit, but only visit a certain kind of picture that they really wanted to paint. Yeah.
It was Potemkin villages, if you remember that phrase of, we only saw what they wanted us to see. And before I went, I studied what the Danish Red Cross went through with the Nazi regime when they went to Theresienstadt, a concentration camp. And they were not prepared for all of the made-up orchestras, made-up beautiful avenues, made-up perfect little homes. So I knew that I had to be looking for that. And I could recognize that, but I could also recognize, I spoke enough Khmer, so I could hear the bad translations, and I could see the fear. But that didn't make it easy. What I finally realized was that I was best looking at what was missing, and that's what he puts in the women dialogue. There was nothing but work and hard labor. There's no homes of worship. All of the pagodas, the churches, the mosques were closed. There are no homes. Everybody was sent into the countryside, so cities were empty and they were left to decay. There was no sports, there was no schools, there was no music, there was no dance, there was no entertainment. It was work, 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 and then those horrible co-ops with those watery soup meals. And there was no medicine to speak of. The doctors were killed. And they took us to a couple of pharmaceutical places where it was real child labor is what it was. And when you mentioned how young they were, they said, well, this is actually a better education than if we put them to schools. And what they made was medicine that didn't work.
And so you knew right away, Elizabeth, right, when you landed, because you had been to Cambodia before, that like something really, really was truly off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like it's clearly a stage that you're being shown, and you knew that.
Well, when you see Phnom Penh empty, yeah. I mean, there's no secret. It didn't take I wasn't being very clever. I mean, it was empty. Before they started locking us in the houses, our guest house, I went around and I looked in the empty houses the way Lise does in the end of the movie. I did that at the beginning. And Rithy really pulled out wonderful bits and pieces and put them into this, I think, a masterful reimagining so that you don't have to read a whole fat book like mine. And like the elephant, I had written that I felt we were playing that game of the finding the elephant. And the night he picked the little bits and pieces out, and the arguments that we had, he picked it all out, and he created this much richer film because you saw all sides of it, the stuff we didn't see. And then later, when the Vietnamese come over, invade and kick out the Khmer Rouge, the torture centers and their files were open, and they had decided that I was a CIA agent.
Oh, wow.
I'm here. So, I mean, but they had all the questions that a normal journalist asks, they considered me a CIA agent.
I think one thing that really stood out to me when I was also watching the film is I would imagine a struggle would be, and there was a scene there where you three journalists had to be really careful when you interacted with any other person that was maybe drawn in. They pulled like a civilian in, and you had to be quite careful and almost tread lightly to make sure, because you knew the responsibility. Every word that was coming out of your mouth would potentially, and his response would potentially put that person in danger.
No, we didn't know that.
Okay.
No.
Okay. That wasn't something
No,
that you felt like you had to
Rithy
carry.
was very, I think that was a good point. I'm glad he put that in. No, but then on the other hand, they would never have given us someone like that.
True,
They
too
would
risky.
the only time I talked to people who were not chosen were the very first days when I would sneak out and in my awful Khmer, cassette American, I would say, I try to get an answer and I follow them around, and then finally they figured out what I was doing. But no, we didn't know, and I think we just acted as we would in any other situation, asking questions. But mine were a little more aggressive, I think because I knew the country, but also Washington Post. I mean, they expected me to be.
Right, right. So you didn't have any fear when it came to asking questions or formulating your questions for Pol Pot? I mean, I would.
No, you switch into this other gear.
Yeah.
And it's the journalist gear. And I don't think of the three of us, nobody feared. The intellectual was predisposed to be more polite, as the character in the movie is. But he talked in such abstractions that you couldn't pin it down. So they could talk at a very abstract level that doesn't come down to what was really going on and the whole idea of human rights. No.
Yeah, I think it's just so fascinating, and I think Rithy did just such a great job with layering, taking pieces of the chapter, layering it with the music and the silence, and flashing certain scenes of what was really happening behind the scenes, and it really captures kind of the paranoia that I would imagine you guys were kind of could sense in the air.
What I love about the movie is the mixed media. You have black and white film, you have the actual film itself, and then his mocat, the figures. And he's been using that in his Khmer Rouge era films pretty consistently. When he talks about it, he'll tell you that he cannot film actors being killed. You will not find that. You will not see actors being killed in his films as for him, it's not just emotional. For him, I think he's used the word pornographic. So that's one of the reasons you have that. But it also, it's an artistic weave, particular to him, that adds a dimension that reminds you what you're seeing and where it is.
You are essentially the co-writer, are you, of this film, Elizabeth? I mean, it's based off of your words.
I'm given credit. I am the person, I talked a lot, but no, I did not write. We've been talking about this for about 10 years. And the acts that they gave me, the lipsticks, we've been talking about this forever. And the more he lived it, I wrote the history of it, and he pulled out Bapana. There's a couple of other figures. Oksakun, who is the guy who he calls Sokun. It's Oksakun, who was a Paris intellectual who they brought out for me to see. And I talked to him, and in French, he gave me a lot of clues about how badly he'd been treated. He said something to the effect, how did I see that flower? Do you have a flower? And I said, yes. And he said, it's a beautiful flower. I haven't seen that flower in years. So he pulled, we kept talking about it. But no, I'm very happy he gave me the credit, but no.
Yeah, my question about it is if you had any creative kind of directive input in the movie, or that was really, again, just mostly Rithy.
Yeah, I did, I briefed the actors, and I became Irene Jacob, who plays my character, and I don't call her myself, my character. We had a lot back and forth to the point that he pretends that we were plotting against him to add this bit and that bit. But, she asked for she wanted to see all the old footage of me when we came back and television appearances. And then up to my 2015 appearance before the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, she watched, you can see this on film, she watched my testimony. So she really got into it. And when my husband and I were last in Paris, she treated us to dinner at her home and to lunch at her home. And it was a very big experience for all of them. And I have to say, the actors took a reduction in pay in their regular pay in order to be in this movie because it meant so much to them.
How does it feel, Elizabeth, to think and watch and sit in a movie theater like this and watch your story kind of being played out? This originally showed in France, in Cannes Festival, and then a few times in New York, and now here. We were privileged enough to watch it here in Long Beach. So every time that you watch and you sit here in a movie theater, does it still hit you every time? What are the emotions that come up with that?
The easiest to say is the first time when I had no idea what it would be. And we were at Cannes, and Rithy was sitting on this side of me. Irene was here. My husband was back there. The other actors were there. No one had seen the final cut but Rithy. So we were all wondering what was going to be in it. It was, I remember my hand was on the seat, and before long, Rithy and I had our hands on top of each other, and then at the end, when when my character is taking the casket out, I blew it, it was just tears. And he looked at me and I said yes, because he didn't know if I'd like it or not. And it's the honor of a lifetime. That's what I can say. It's an honor.
What do you hope, Elizabeth, when people sit here and watch your film and watch your story, what do you hope people will be getting out of this movie?
The real experience of a cruel, totalitarian government. I remember when my book came out first in 1986, people didn't know Cambodia from Vietnam, from Thailand, from anything, and it was all blur. And my goal then is the goal now, to give you the full story, to be able for people to be really able to be inside Cambodia, respect exactly what they went through, not see them as an other, but to see them as real people with real histories who suffered real things, whose leaders totally betrayed them, and that I was privileged to play the role of being able to look at it and then come back and write about it, but I want them to know this could happen. These were great people, and it could happen to any place. In fact, in my book, my first quote is my best buddy from the war days, a banker named May Pol Pot, and he wouldn't leave. I was worried, and he said, no, they're Cambodians, they'll treat us well. And he survived, and he called me from the border as soon as he got out, and he said, Elizabeth, it's one thing to suffer to live, but it's another to suffer to die, and if it lasted much longer, I would have committed suicide. And that's my first quote in my book.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elizabeth, honestly, if it wasn't for brave journalists like yourself, people who are truly have the courage to sit in front of Pol Pot and make these questions, you truly have dedicated your entire life to really making sure that the truth is known. If anybody researches this lady, there are like 1 million awards on this woman, and it's just incredible that you deserve this, and I'm so glad that we as a Cambodian community now have this film from Rithy to learn from and to really understand what had happened from 1975 to 1979. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here. Thank you. Is that it? They cut you off. Right? They cut me off. Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. Do we take questions from the audience? Three questions, special questions. Yes, in front.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for being here, and Dorothy. Dorothy. So in the film, Lisa's character is very courageous in her questioning of Pol Pot in that space. And as we had witnessed, when people smell fear, and also be able to be crippled by that, but Lisa's character emboldened herself in that space to take more control of that situation. I was wondering if you can talk about that as a reporter in a very distressed situation.
She tried to be very American. I mean, she would say I mean, that was the whole point. In fact, a couple of friends of mine who were in the war with me thought she captured that. And then secondly, what a privilege to have Irene Jacot play me, my goodness. I mean, it was, she's like one of the great actresses of France. She's already won a César and so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, they were French about it, but she went out of her way to act American and to take, and Rithy kept underlining that it was so rare to have an American in that era. And so I think they did I was more than pleased.
Second question, any other questions? Yes, Mike?
There's no question Cambodia exists. I think the government is, the government, particularly since 2017, when they took away all rights, it's not a good government. It's very corrupt. No rights. The independent media has been destroyed. No political opposition is allowed, so on and so forth. But Cambodia exists. And look at the neighborhood. I mean, it's a tough neighborhood to be in. I don't make predictions ever. It's for me, it's not a great game, and I don't know if I'd be right or wrong. But that's not the question, is whether or not it exists. The question is what Cambodia whether Cambodia will somehow surmount the Hun Sen monopoly on power. Will you return to a democracy? Will human rights come back? Will the corruption end with all the scam centers? That's the question for me. It exists. That's not the issue. Next to him.
Final question?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your sharing your experience during this hard time, and also
Can you
want share myself a little bit. My name is Batna, and I was a child labor in the Khmer Rouge, and I was go to refugee camp and all these things. But I also returned back to Cambodia to help rebuild after the election. And during that time, I go through the so-called coup d'etat, right? And become a second refugee again. Escaped to Indonesia at that time. But here, what you've been mentioned about how your experience also for like that, because during that time, the Khmer Rouge want to say no because the Vietnamese, they are the one who call Yuan. They use the word Yuan, right? That come want to invade Cambodia. So now, which is the one that they're saying now is the Thai, it's not the Thai, now they use the steel. So I wonder if there could be a repeat in history in the sense that at the end of the day, it's just the Khmer people who are suffering or dying in this situation, and just hoping that 50 years later, we will repeat this situation while calling as being nationalist, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if you.
So she thinks that
similarity in this
Vietnam
case.
will take over again.
She's,
Or is
she's
anybody
questioning
follow
the order
what's
of
developed in
conflict that's
Cambodia
happening
right
right now. Is it repeating history?
This is not the only region in the world where European drawn borders are at issue. I don't think you have to worry about this will somehow mean the diminution of Cambodia per se. The Vietnam-Cambodia border seems to be quiet right now, and then the Thai border, that's very much fomented by the scan centers, the rivalry between Hun Sen's family and the other Thai family. It's not ancient history. This is modern, and I think it's smart not to be drawn into the notion that there's some constant threat from centuries and centuries. This is modern problems. It's not, you don't have to worry about when somebody else took you over, that's over. And you worry about those scan centers that are on the Thai border with Cambodia side of the Thai border, and you redraw your lines, but that's not it. And don't be pulled into that. That's sort of that's the ruse of tyrannical governments.